We're going to take a look at Donald Trump's energy policy. By the way, I'm Terry Madonna, and this is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and welcome as always. But before we get to energy and Trump's energy policies, I have the newly elected Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania. Well, newly elected, let's say, for the second term. He's with me today, and we're going to get into some very, very important audits, and we'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, Eugene DePasquale is sitting across from me. He's Pennsylvania's Auditor General. He won re-election rather handily, a lot closer than Donald Trump won our state, may I point out, General. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Number two, I said newly elected. That's true, but you've been in office for 4 years, right?
That's right. So it's newly elected for a second term.
For a second term, I got that. All right, look, before we go on, and man, there's a lot of stuff I want to get into with you. I don't know why we elect the Auditor General, the State Treasurer, and the Attorney General in a presidential election cycle when it's so hard for you all to get out and to get your message across because it's drowned out. Why aren't we electing you in next year, for example, in the municipal elections when you can run around the state and do your thing?
It's a fair point because we do get drowned out at some level. It didn't hit me personally until it was Game 2 of the World Series, and I'm in a hotel in Cranberry. We're going to go to Erie the next day.
Right.
And so now we're just there, and I don't have control of the remote, and the commercials come on.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one of mine come on, one of Joe Torcella, and then there's like 17,000 for the other races, and you're like going, how do you crack through
But here's
on
the
this?
point. These three offices are critical.
Right.
And you folks have to be independent of everybody else, the governor including, regardless of the governor in your own party. And number three, if you did it in another election cycle, you could get around, there would be some focus, the media, instead of being, and we also had one of the most important Senate elections.
That's right. I think that there's certainly a discussion to be had on that because, look, we had one televised debate for Auditor General.
Right.
If there was more than 7 people watching it, I'd be shocked. But if it was actually a standalone election, you'd probably have more interest.
All right, we're going to get to what the Auditor General does. He ferrets out waste, corruption, and fraud. I think I got that right. Waste, corruption, fraud, among other things. All right, let's talk about the independent fiscal office right off. They make the projections about the fiscal health of the Commonwealth. We got a new, new legislature coming in. Governor Wolf, in his final 2 years of his first term. What's the state of the fiscal? What's the fiscal state of the Commonwealth?
There will be a deficit next year, whether it'll be between $1 and $3 billion at a minimum. That's the range. The independent fiscal office said 1.7, but it'll be between 1 and 3. They said the current structural deficit for this current year is $500 million. They are, I think, a little bit more pessimistic than I think is true, but the short answer is they're right on the general idea that the revenue projections did not come in, mostly because they passed a budget based on additional gaming that was never enacted.
And they didn't enact it, and that was $100 million. I could be wrong.
So that's money that can't come in,
Yeah. So the bottom line here, General, is simple. It looks like cut expenses or raise taxes, and we know how popular. I got my hand up here in the raise tax column. That's going to be right.
I have been, across Pennsylvania the past year. People feel tapped out. And it's not that they don't believe some of these other issues are priorities. They believe that many of these programs are important, but they want us to literally become as efficient as possible before even thinking of asking another dime a tax.
You're exactly right. All right, let's go to another issue. One I think is very important, and that's college affordability.
Right.
You've been all over that for some time. And many colleges are moving to scholarships. At Franklin and Marshall, they're doing a great job of raising money for scholarships. I mean, you can't have this kind of college debt. What have you found out?
The privates are, for a host of reasons, ahead of the public and the state relateds on this issue. Here's what I find unconscionable, and I don't want to just say this against Penn State because I think it applies to Temple and Pitt as well. If you are a middle-class kid in Pennsylvania, you are much more likely to be able to afford going to the University of Nebraska or Ohio State than going to Pitt, Penn State, or Temple. That has to change.
Oh, that is not good.
There was the drum major, my son's on marching band and baseball in West York. The drum major there is now playing in the band at Nebraska because it was more affordable for her to go to the University of Nebraska than Penn State. That's just not right.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. All right, we're going to go through a bunch of these because General DePasquale has been really working on a whole variety of these audits and projections. Right. Let's look at job retraining.
Right. We are, one of the things that because I just met with my team a couple days ago, we are going to be making that a focused performance audit for my second term. It is very clear that there are a lot of people that this economy is being left behind. So our unemployment rate is low, but there are a lot of people that have not been able, when their factory job left or they were laid off from a certain industry. And look, some of those jobs aren't coming back. So we have to find a way to get people trained for the jobs that are actually going to be coming into existence in our existence in the healthcare industry, the technology industry, specifically in southwestern Pennsylvania. Yeah. There are a lot of people that are just scraping by. We have to find a way to change that dynamic.
We're going to run to a break, but here's the point. I mean, one of the reasons, we're not getting into the presidential campaign, but one of the reasons that Donald Trump he tapped into a real need, and that need is for job retraining and skill makeovers, right, if you will, for lots of folks who are stuck in jobs that are minimum wage or just above, right, because they don't have the skills in the new economy.
That's exactly right.
I mean, and that's something that I think we all ought to care about, right, regardless of party.
And that's going to be a priority of mine in my second term.
All right, coming up, we're going to get into economic issues for seniors. I'm chatting with the Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania, and we'll continue with that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, now celebrating 100 years as the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. We're going to talk a little bit of Trump's energy policy, but first we have the newly elected Pennsylvania Auditor General Eugene DePasquale with us today. We're talking about a whole variety of the audits that he's conducted and how he's looking out for the taxpayers of the state. You like that way of putting it, don't you?
Absolutely, yes.
I figured you would. All right, what are we doing about property tax relief? I mean, how many years have we been debating a property tax reform and property tax before you and I were born, I think, yeah, right? Go ahead.
We audit every school district in the state. So part of my job is finding out how school districts can save money so they don't have to raise school taxes. I mean, in the current environment in Harrisburg, I just don't know if they're going to be able to put together a broad reform of the package. But I'm just going to give you one example how at least my office can play a role. The city of Pittsburgh was preparing to actually pass a property tax increase for their school district. We came out with an audit that showed that they had the largest fund balance in the state. Because of that, they actually didn't go through with their property tax increase because they didn't even know how much money they had. So is there an appropriate discussion about what is the proper level of funding for public education? Yeah. Of course, and we should continue to have that debate. But when school districts aren't properly managing their money, we've got to take care of that issue first.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think, some school districts have these funds, these balances that, right, they have on hand, and then they may go and try to raise taxes while they have these fund balances. Right. Now, their argument is, well, we have to keep that money in reserve because we never know what contingencies, right, we never know what the state's going to do. Right. We could end up with a budget not adopted until December.
No, and on that point, they certainly have a fair point. There's a healthy, I would say anywhere in the 8 to 12 range, is appropriate. When you get school districts that are at about 18, 19, 20 and above and still trying to raise taxes, that's where I really draw a hard line.
Oh, so you think there's a percentage of the funds that they have in their annual budget a percentage of the reserves that they had that would cover once they get above a certain
correct.
percentage. You're saying don't talk about. Go ahead.
That's correct. Yeah. To me, there's a line about the closer you get to 20, you shouldn't even consider property tax increase. I understand if you're in the 6 or 7 range, you're in a much more precarious situation.
Yeah. All right. One other issue before I let you go has to do with charter school reform. I mean, we have this vigorous debate. There are charter school proponents or charter school opponents. We have some charter schools that are conducted by religious, or, folks with religious affiliations. There's some that are private and independent, and then there are some that school districts create. Do I got that all about right?
That's correct.
And so what's going on? What do you? And there's debates about their funding, debates about their educational requirements, but without going into that, what do you have to do with them? What's your role as Auditor General?
We audit them just
school?
like we audit traditional public schools. I want to start off on the reform idea. It is pretty clear that parents want some level of choice, at least in your more urban areas. That's number one. Number two, it is pretty clear that there are some charter schools that are doing well, and there are some that aren't doing well. And number three, it is pretty clear that there are at least a handful of blatant thieves out there that are robbing taxpayers. So you can weave a reform plan that takes the best of what exists in charter school, do it in a way that doesn't hurt traditional public schools, and actually try to find the best of what works in both so that all kids can benefit, and let's get the thieves out of the system.
I got it. So how optimistic are you that, I mean, the legislature has a role in this, correct?
The legislature and the governor have to come together on this.
That's what I was going to say, yeah. Yeah, so...
How optimistic am I that they're going to come up with something?
I can tell not very.
Look,
but.
I would say that it's slightly better chances of than me being the closer for the Pirates.
Here we go. I knew you were going to.
Yeah, come on. It's the off season, right?
His family comes from Pittsburgh. He lives in York, and we always forgive him. Actually, I'll tell you, I'm going to let you get out of here, but we do have a lot of Pittsburgh fans, particularly the Steelers, east of the Susquehanna River. I thought that wasn't allowed, General. I thought that
it is allowed, but even when they play like the Arizona Cardinals, they're half the stadium's black, the terrible towels. So it's not just Central.
All right, we're going to let him get out of here and go back and do his job. All right, coming up, we're going to hear from Terry Fitzpatrick. We're going to get one of our energy and monthly energy updates. This is important. Talk a little bit about Trump and what's going on in our state with natural gas. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back to the program. Well, joining me as often is the case is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania and a former member, I always bring this up, of the PUC, the Pennsylvania Utility Commission. Expert on, what's that? An expert on lots of these deregulations in the energy area. All right, we're all trying to figure out what Donald Trump is likely to do with energy, and I'll let you get into this. Maybe because he's still trying to figure out what he's going to do, given the nature of the campaign. But what's your take on all this?
Well, he had a lot to say about it, Terry, during the campaign, of course. You know, one of the big things that got attention here in Pennsylvania was he said he was going to bring coal jobs back. He also had opinions, some pretty strong opinions on some of the environmental issues that affect energy, particularly climate change. He said during the campaign, at least, that it was a hoax. He promised to develop all sources of energy, and I think with really a focus on traditional sources that would include natural gas.
Right.
So that was the campaign. You know, now comes the governing, and you know, a whole set of
like
tough
reality?
issues. Yes, reality sets in.
Go ahead.
And,
okay.
You know, I think so. I think this was a big change, of course, from President Obama. Now, President Obama supported natural gas, but he was a big, one of his main points of emphasis was combating climate change. And he tried to get legislation through to establish a cap and trade program for carbon.
Right.
That did not succeed, so eventually he had EPA just issue regulations to try to do the same thing for existing power plants, the Clean Power Plan. Those regulations are under litigation right now.
Now, let me stop you right there.
Yes.
Can Trump undo those? Can he end them without going to Congress or to some regulatory body?
Right now, those are final regulations, so they have the force of law. He cannot just, with the stroke of a pen, eliminate them. They are, however, under appeal before a federal court, Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington right now. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a very unusual move, had stayed them earlier in the year, so the regulations are not in effect. They won't go into effect until not only the Circuit Court, but the Supreme Court itself hears them. So they're under stay right now, but if, for example, they were to survive the legal process, they would have the force of law. President Trump would then have to establish a new process to try to undo them. But of course, the Supreme Court is 4-4 between conservatives and more liberal members right now.
He's going to have an appointee, right?
Right. So that could affect it too. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
Is there anything that he could do immediately upon taking office that would affect energy? I mean, maybe with, you know, the folks that are involved in regulation of energy in the federal government, or the emphasis that he puts, or telling people to do A as opposed to B? Yeah. I mean, just give us a shorthand version of that.
Well, I think there are some obstacles to maybe him doing everything he wants to do, but there's no question that with this change of administration, there is going to be some impact, because he names the people that enforce these laws. So there's a lot of interpretation that goes on there, too. There's enforcement discretion about when you go after somebody and when you maybe give them some more time. So, yes, it clearly is going to have an effect.
Yeah. So overall, then, I mean, you have this, as you point out, a trickle-down effect that comes to the states.
Correct.
So how does that manifest itself?
Well, it'll manifest itself because, for example, one of the issues that we were going to grapple with here in Pennsylvania was how was Pennsylvania going to implement the Clean Power Plan once those regulations went into effect. If the rug gets pulled out from underneath those regulations, then that's not an issue that we'll be debating here in Pennsylvania. Of course, there's a lot that we can do on our own in terms of addressing energy policies, and you know, but it's a new ball game here too. I mean, we have the same Governor Wolf is still in office, but you know, in the legislative races, the Republicans actually gained ground. So, so that, you know, it's shifting ground here on these policy questions.
All right, I want to talk a little. I want to get an update on the state. You know, we can talk about natural gas and coal and some other things. Let's do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
I'm chatting with Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the head of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. He's our expert. He comes in from time to time and helps us understand more about energy policy. All right, natural gas production is down because the price is down. It looks like prices are rising now in energy as a whole. What do you see in the next 6 months to a year, knowing that it could change on a dime? Go ahead.
Well, production has actually continued at a pretty high rate. We haven't been drilling as many new wells, but the production from the existing wells is so good. Even at the low prices we've seen, we've had this record production. So, that's going great guns. I think the big issue there is, we need to build pipelines to get the gas where it's needed. I think that's been going on, say, the election of President Trump, maybe if anything helps that, because the overall political environment, I think, shifts more towards, getting energy out there to folks that need it.
And that's a tough problem with the pipelines. I mean, I think we have to get the natural gas from where it is into the marketplace, and then yet the pipeline has to go through areas of the state where you have hometown people, and put it that way, who are, get disturbed if it's near them, worrying about the value of their property. Then you've got the concern about leaky. That's complicated, isn't it?
Well, it is, Terry. But and you have the keep it in the ground movement now that thinks that sincere people who believe that maybe we need to move away from all fossil fuels. But the problem is, realistically, the experts who look at this, even if you're trying to combat climate change, you need to use more gas, probably, not less, because gas emits fewer pollutants than other types of fossil fuels. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to coal. We talked about this before, and obviously we had, back in the day, anthracite coal up in the Northeast, bituminous coal out in the Southwest. They were a major part of the economy of the state. We used to talk about coal, steel, and then in the next breath, what did we talk about? Coal. Well, what do you think the future is?
Well, I think that coal is helped by the fact of President Trump's election. But I do think that coal has at least two problems. On the policy front, you've had what's been termed at times a war on coal by the environmental movement against coal because of the carbon emissions. The other thing is the market. With all of this gas coming about now, coal has had a tough time competing in the market. So it has both problems.
I get it.
The outlook improves a bit on the political front with regard to government policies about coal. So, and the market can turn. I mean, the market can change. It's not static. So, the outlook is a little bit brighter for coal, I would say, than it was back before the election.
And we have nuclear power plants that use coal, right, as a source to create.
Well, they use nuclear fuel, but we have a lot of coal plants and nuclear plants in the state. And there's questions about nuclear power plants, whether they can continue to operate, again, because of the market conditions, because because gas, rather, has driven prices down so much, it's creating problems for these other energy types.
If you had a guess, the one thing that might occur in energy in the state, in the state with Wolf and the legislature, what would it be?
Well, I think that the trend towards gas will continue, and I think the pipelines, while there's a lot of political opposition in some places to them, I think they'll continue to be built because I think they have to.
All right, thanks. You'll come back soon, and we'll do another update. All right, We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.